Jimmy Kimmel has just been pulled off TV after his shocking remarks about the death of Charlie Kirk, and the fallout is tearing through Hollywood, Washington, and the media world. Affiliates dropped his show, ABC yanked it from the schedule, and politicians are weighing in. But what everyone really wants to know is, what does Kimmel himself have to say? That answer is being held until the very end of this video. Stay with us, because the alleged reaction, unconfirmed but explosive, might change how you see this entire controversy. The story that set all of this in motion begins with the shocking and tragic death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. At just 31 years old, Kirk had risen to national prominence as the co-founder of Turning Point USA, an organization aimed at mobilizing young conservatives on college campuses. He was no stranger to controversy, often clashing with liberal voices and sparking heated debates across social media and television. But no one could have predicted the violence that unfolded in Utah. On that night, Kirk was speaking outdoors at Utah Valley University, addressing students and supporters. Suddenly, gunfire shattered the gathering. Panic spread instantly through the crowd. Kirk was struck and killed in what police quickly called a targeted attack. The alleged shooter, a 22-year-old man named Tyler Robinson, was arrested shortly after and charged with aggravated murder. Reports suggest Robinson had once been raised in a conservative family, but later shifted politically and told friends he was fed up with Kirk's hatred. Whether those claims hold or not, the act itself shocked the nation. Kirk's assassination wasn't just another violent incident, it immediately became politicized. Commentators across the spectrum seized on the tragedy to support their own narratives. Conservatives framed it as proof of increasing hostility toward right-wing voices, while liberals insisted that violence of any kind had to be condemned universally, without partisan framing. Either way, the death of Kirk dominated headlines and drew intense scrutiny from the media. For Kirk's followers and Turning Point USA, it was a devastating blow. The organization lost its co-founder, and millions of young conservatives lost the figurehead who had championed their causes. To others, it raised disturbing questions about the escalation of political tensions in America and whether heated rhetoric had boiled over into deadly action. This was the climate in which Jimmy Kimmel made his controversial remarks. A nation in shock, a political movement in mourning, and a media landscape buzzing with speculation. Everyone was on edge, waiting to see how public figures would respond. Some called for unity, others used it as ammunition in the culture wars. And into this atmosphere stepped Kimmel, a comedian who has never been afraid to wade into political waters, but who this time may have gone a step too far. Just days after Kirk's death, Jimmy Kimmel opened his late-night monologue by addressing the tragedy. But instead of offering a simple moment of silence or condolences, Kimmel did what Kimmel does. He made it political. He pointed out that some on the right were already attempting to label the shooter as anything but one of their own, mocking what he described as the MAGA gang, trying to spin the story. With a sharp smirk, Kimmel quipped, "The MAGA gang is desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it." To many in his live audience, it was just another pointed jab in Kimmel's ongoing feud with Trump World. But outside the studio, the reaction was immediate and severe. For grieving conservatives, it wasn't just a joke, it was a slap in the face. Here was a mainstream TV host on network television making light of a brutal assassination, and he didn't stop there. The following night, Kimmel doubled down, again mentioning the shooting and saying, "Many in MAGA land are working very hard to capitalize on the murder of Charlie Kirk." He specifically called out politicians like Vice President J.D. Vance, who had blamed the dangerous left for creating an atmosphere that led to the violence. Kimmel suggested that these narratives were hollow and hypocritical, even referencing statistics claiming far-right groups were the leading source of domestic terrorism. These remarks instantly lit a fire. For conservatives, Kimmel's words weren't just tasteless, they were proof of bias, evidence that mainstream media figures were incapable of showing respect for right-wing voices, even in death. Social media exploded with outrage. Hashtags calling for Kimmel's firing trended within hours. Clips of the monologues circulated widely, not just on Twitter, but on TikTok, Instagram, and conservative forums. The backlash was amplified by the timing. The wounds from Kirk's assassination were still raw. His family and supporters were still processing the loss. And into that moment came Kimmel, cracking jokes and turning the death into political fodder. To his critics, it wasn't comedy, it was cruelty. What's important to understand here is that Kimmel has a long history of leaning political on his show. He's gone after Trump, mocked Republican lawmakers, and inserted himself into debates about guns, healthcare, and voting rights. His fans love him for it, but his detractors see him as the embodiment of liberal Hollywood elitism. In this case, that perception only intensified the fury. This was the spark that ignited everything. The affiliates, the advertisers, and eventually ABC itself would all be pulled into the storm because of what Kimmel chose to say in those two monologues. The first domino to fall wasn't ABC itself, it was the affiliates. In the world of broadcast television, local affiliate stations wield enormous power. They're the pipelines that deliver network programming into households across America. And when they decide to cut a show, the impact is immediate and brutal. That's exactly what happened to Jimmy Kimmel. Eyewitnesses later told reporters that some in the crowd thought it was a prank at first, a kind of publicity stunt. But as staff repeated the message, "Tonight's taping is canceled. The show is off the air until further notice." The mood shifted from confusion to disappointment. Some fans shouted questions. Others groaned in frustration, but the staff didn't elaborate. The network had ordered silence, and silence was what they got. Behind those closed doors, the usually buzzing set of Jimmy Kimmel Live was eerily quiet. Camera operators who had prepped their rigs earlier in the day stood idle. Writers and crew, who had rehearsed segments just hours earlier, were told to pack up and head home. The monologue Kimmel had prepared, insiders say, was sitting on his desk, unread, undelivered, and destined to remain unseen. Reporters stationed outside the building captured what little movement they could. They noted that around 8 p.m., Kimmel himself emerged through a side door, wearing a black baseball cap pulled low over his face. He kept his head down as he walked briskly to a waiting car. There were no smiles, no waves to fans, no comments for the cameras, just a quiet departure from the building he had called home for 2 decades. The moment marked more than just the suspension of a television show. It felt like the end of an era. For 20 years, Jimmy Kimmel had been a fixture of ABC's late-night programming, his name synonymous with celebrity interviews, viral pranks, and biting political commentary. But now, his studio was dark, his audience was dismissed, and his voice was absent from America's television. And perhaps the most unsettling part? No one knew if or when the lights would ever come back on. The first domino to fall wasn't ABC itself, it was the affiliates. In the world of broadcast television, local affiliate stations wield enormous power. They're the pipelines that deliver network programming into households across America. And when they decide to cut a show, the impact is immediate and brutal. That's exactly what happened to Jimmy Kimmel. It began with Nexstar Media Group, the largest owner of local television stations in the United States. Nexstar controls nearly 200 stations, including 23 ABC affiliates, which means they broadcast Jimmy Kimmel Live into millions of homes each night. After Kimmel's remarks about Charlie Kirk circulated online, Nexstar executives wasted no time. Andrew Alford, president of Nexstar's broadcast division, announced that the company would be preempting Kimmel's show indefinitely. His statement was blunt. Kimmel's comments were offensive and insensitive at a critical time, and unfit to air. That announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. One media analyst put it simply, "When the affiliates pull you, you're already finished." Nexstar's decision meant that in dozens of cities across the country, from major markets to rural towns, Kimmel was gone. Instead of his usual monologue, viewers were treated to replacement programming. In some markets, reruns filled the slot. In others, local managers inserted tribute specials honoring Charlie Kirk. But Nexstar wasn't alone. Sinclair Broadcast Group, which owns 30 ABC affiliates, quickly followed suit. Their decision went even further. Sinclair not only pulled Kimmel, they announced they would replace his show with a special program honoring Charlie Kirk's life and work. Sinclair executives didn't stop there. They publicly called on Kimmel to apologize directly to Kirk's family, and even suggested he make a personal donation to Turning Point USA away as a gesture of good faith. These moves weren't just symbolic, they were devastating. Between Nexstar and Sinclair, Kimmel lost nearly one-third of his nightly distribution in the blink of an eye. Imagine tuning in to your favorite show one night only to find it replaced by a memorial program. That's what happened across America. For millions of viewers, Jimmy Kimmel Live had simply vanished. The affiliate mutiny marked a turning point. Suddenly, ABC was backed into a corner. It's one thing for critics online to demand cancellation. It's another when the very stations responsible for carrying your show refuse to air it. The local affiliates had spoken, and the message was clear. Kimmel's jokes had crossed a line. With affiliates revolting, the pressure shifted directly to ABC and its parent company, Disney. Within hours of Nexstar and Sinclair's announcements, ABC executives issued their own bombshell. Jimmy Kimmel Live would be preempted indefinitely. The language was careful but unmistakable. Preempted meant the show wasn't outright canceled, but it was removed from the schedule with no return date in sight. In the world of television, indefinitely often means exactly what it sounds like. There's no plan to bring it back. ABC didn't elaborate, offering no defense of their host, no explanation for viewers, no apology to Kirk's family, just a single line confirming that Kimmel was off the air. Inside the industry, the move was unprecedented. Kimmel has been on late-night television since 2003, becoming one of ABC's longest-running stars. To yank him so suddenly, without even letting him deliver a follow-up monologue, stunned both fans and critics. At the network's Hollywood studio, the confusion was palpable. Audience members who had lined up for that night's taping were turned away at the door, told simply that the show would not be happening. Reporters described seeing Kimmel leave quietly, head down under a black cap, without a word to the press. For ABC, the calculation was brutally pragmatic. With affiliates refusing to air the show, advertisers nervous about backlash, and political pressure mounting, Kimmel had become a liability. The show wasn't just losing distribution, it was threatening the network's relationships with regulators. By suspending him, ABC may have hoped to defuse the crisis before it spiraled further. But the silence spoke volumes. Unlike past controversies where networks rallied behind their talent, this time ABC offered Kimmel no cover. It was as if they had decided that fighting for him wasn't worth the risk. And so, for the first time in over 2 decades, Jimmy Kimmel's voice went dark. For his critics, it was a victory. For his supporters, it was censorship. For ABC, it was damage control. And for Jimmy Kimmel himself, the silence became deafening. Fans scoured his social media for a reaction, but there was none. Officially, Kimmel has not commented at all on his suspension. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered that he had planned to address the controversy on his next show, but ABC never let him. The network had pulled the plug, and in doing so, left everyone wondering, what would Kimmel have said if he'd been allowed to speak? Once Jimmy Kimmel's suspension hit headlines, the controversy spilled far beyond television. It wasn't just about a late-night comedian anymore, it became a political lightning rod. At the center of it all was Donald Trump, who wasted no time declaring victory. On Truth Social, Trump gleefully posted that the Jimmy Kimmel Show is canceled, congratulating ABC for having the courage to do what had to be done. He mocked Kimmel as a ratings-challenged loser, and even took the chance to drag other late-night hosts, calling Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers irrelevant. To Trump and his allies, Kimmel's downfall was proof that Hollywood couldn't mock conservatives without consequences. But while conservatives celebrated, Democrats and media watchdogs sounded alarms. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer openly warned that opponents of Kimmel should be speaking out to stop what's happening. For Schumer, this wasn't about liking or disliking Jimmy Kimmel, it was about protecting free expression. If a comedian could be pulled off TV under pressure from affiliates and political officials, what did that mean for everyone else? The worry was clear, that America was moving into dangerous territory where political figures could decide who got to stay on air. The controversy deepened when the Federal Communications Commission got involved. FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, a Trump appointee, called Kimmel's comments truly sick and suggested that networks airing his show could face consequences. He praised Nexstar and Sinclair for pulling Kimmel and framed it as broadcasters fulfilling their obligation to act in the public interest. To critics, this sounded like an implicit threat that regulators might punish networks for keeping comedians who mocked the wrong side. Suddenly, what began as a late-night monologue became a national test case for speech, politics, and media control. Republicans framed it as accountability for Hollywood elitism. Democrats saw it as censorship, and ordinary viewers were caught in the middle, watching the battle lines form over what one man said during a comedy show. By this point, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't just absent from television. He had become the centerpiece of a larger debate. His silence only added fuel to the fire, leaving both sides speculating about what he might say if given the chance. Would he apologize, double down, or disappear altogether? While politicians traded shots, the entertainment world rallied in defense of Kimmel. Hollywood comedians, actors, and writers flooded social media with outrage, accusing the affiliates and ABC of caving to political pressure. Actor Ben Stiller declared the suspension isn't right, while comedian Wanda Sykes tweeted that Trump had ended freedom of speech. Fellow late-night host Michael Costa said networks needed to grow a spine and resist censorship. The Writers Guild of America, which represents the staff behind Kimmel's show, released a blistering statement. They warned that suspending Kimmel under government and political pressure set a terrifying precedent. We cannot be a country where late-night talk show hosts serve at the pleasure of the president, their statement read. To them, Kimmel's punishment wasn't about one joke. It was about the future of comedy and commentary in America. Meanwhile, conservative media applauded the decision. Talk radio hosts, Fox News pundits, and right-wing influencers framed it as justice long overdue. To them, Kimmel had spent years mocking conservatives, and now he was finally being held accountable. Some argued that if comedians couldn't show basic respect after a tragedy like Charlie Kirk's death, they didn't deserve a platform. For the public, the reaction was divided and intense. On one side, hashtags like #StandWithKimmel trended, with fans demanding ABC reinstate him immediately. On the other, conservative hashtags like #KimmelCanceled flooded social feeds, celebrating what they saw as a cultural win. Online forums debated whether this was censorship or accountability, with both sides accusing the other of hypocrisy. Behind the scenes, advertisers watched nervously. For them, the controversy wasn't about politics, it was about money. No brand wanted to be caught in the crossfire. Several sponsors quietly paused campaigns tied to Jimmy Kimmel Live while they assessed the fallout. Ad insiders hinted that without a resolution, Kimmel's show could struggle to regain financial footing even if it returned. In short, Hollywood lined up behind Kimmel, conservatives cheered his removal, and everyday viewers were left asking the same question: if political pressure can silence one of the most established late-night hosts in America, who might be next? On the night the news broke, the scene outside Jimmy Kimmel Live's Hollywood studio was surreal. Dozens of fans had lined up hours earlier, tickets in hand, excited for what was supposed to be another night of jokes, sketches, and celebrity interviews. But instead of being ushered in to fill the bleachers, they were stopped at the door by staff members delivering shocking instructions. There would be no show tonight. Eyewitnesses later told reporters that some in the crowd thought it was a prank at first, a kind of publicity stunt. But as staff repeated the message, tonight's taping is canceled. The show is off the air until further notice. The mood shifted from confusion to disappointment. Some fans shouted questions, others groaned in frustration, but the staff didn't elaborate. The network had ordered silence, and silence was what they got. Behind those closed doors, the usually buzzing set of Jimmy Kimmel Live was eerily quiet. Camera operators who had prepped their rigs earlier in the day stood idle. Writers and crew, who had rehearsed segments just hours earlier, were told to pack up and head home. The monologue Kimmel had prepared, insiders say, was sitting on his desk, unread, undelivered, and destined to remain unseen. Reporters stationed outside the building captured what little movement they could. They noted that around 8 p.m., Kimmel himself emerged through a side door, wearing a black baseball cap pulled low over his face. He kept his head down as he walked briskly to a waiting car. There were no smiles, no waves to fans, no comments for the cameras, just a quiet departure from the building he had called home for 2 decades. The moment marked more than just the suspension of a television show. It felt like the end of an era. For 20 years, Jimmy Kimmel had been a fixture of ABC's late-night programming, his name synonymous with celebrity interviews, viral pranks, and biting political commentary. But now, his studio was dark, his audience was dismissed, and his voice was absent from America's television. And perhaps the most unsettling part, no one knew if or when the lights would ever come back on. And now, we reach the part everyone's been waiting for, what Jimmy Kimmel himself is alleged to have said behind the scenes. Let us be crystal clear. Nothing here has been confirmed. These are claims circulating online, whispers from anonymous insiders, and nothing more. But they've gained traction because they sound exactly like something Kimmel might say. According to these rumors, Kimmel was furious about the suspension. He reportedly told colleagues that his words had been twisted into something they were never meant to be. He allegedly said, "I didn't celebrate Charlie Kirk's death. I mocked the hypocrisy of people using his death for politics." That's what comedians do. Hold up a mirror. In another supposed line, he was even harsher. If you're looking for someone to blame, look at the culture of violence in this country, not a monologue on ABC. Some claims go further, suggesting he accused affiliates of caving to political bullying. He allegedly fumed that late-night comedy is supposed to punch up, not kneel down, and warned that if networks let politics dictate comedy, then comedy is dead. Again, these statements are alleged. Nothing is confirmed. But if true, they paint a picture of a host unwilling to back down, unwilling to apologize, and ready to go down swinging. Whether those words ever leave the shadows and reach the public is uncertain. For now, Jimmy Kimmel's voice remains off the air, and all we have are whispers. All we can say for now is rest in peace, Charlie Kirk.